The ceiling fan in the downtown Macon law office clicked with a steady, maddening rhythm. Click, click, click. It pushed the stale, humid air around a cramped room that smelled of mildew, old paper, and 20-year-old carpet. Macon, in July, was a suffocating, heavy kind of hot. The window air conditioning unit in the corner rattled, choking on the humidity, struggling to breathe, spitting drops of warm water onto the baseboards. Daniel stood directly in front of the only window, intentionally blocking out the afternoon glare. He took up space. He always did. He paced the narrow floor, waving his hands, complaining loudly about the price of gas, the cost of groceries, and the immense burden of driving their father to the clinic every Thursday. Sweat beaded thick on his forehead, staining the collar of a custom charcoal suit that bunched awkwardly at his neck. When he exhaled, the faint, sour odor of cheap, stale bourbon drifted across the desk. "You think it is easy?" Daniel snapped. He leaned forward, planting his heavy hands on the scratched mahogany desk. The cuff of his suit jacket pulled back, exposing a thick wrist. Silver caught the flickering fluorescent light. A Rolex. Heavy. Expensive. Bought and paid for with the exact amount of the check Jennifer sent last month to fix the parents' leaking roof. The roof that was probably still leaking right now. Jennifer sat on the opposite side of the desk. Her back did not touch the chair. Both heels rested flat and square against the cold concrete floor. Her white linen shirt was pressed sharp, the creases perfect and unforgiving. She did not blink. She did not argue. She watched the second hand on his stolen watch sweep in a smooth, quiet circle. "She is just asking you to be reasonable, Jenny." A trembling voice whined from the shadows of the corner. Their mother was huddled on a cracked leather sofa, dabbing her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. The sofa groaned every time she shifted her weight. She played the victim perfectly. She looked up, her expression hardening into something ugly and familiar. "You are gone all the time," her mother said, her voice dropping the fragile act for a second. "Daniel is the one here. He does the heavy lifting. Your grandfather passed. You need to sign the Savannah property over to your brother. You live alone. You have no husband, no kids. What do you need all that land for, anyway?" A thick, oily silence fell over the room. The fan clicked. The AC unit rattled. Daniel smirked, adjusting his jacket, running a hand over his greasy hair. He fed off his mother's bitter words. He grew taller, puffed up with a hollow kind of power. "I am not trying to be greedy here," Daniel said. "But family responsibility is not just mailing a few dollars home when you feel guilty. You left us to deal with the real mess." A sharp ache flared tight in Jennifer's chest. The raw, stupid instinct of blood ties. The phantom pain of wanting a family that did not exist. She took a slow breath, counted to 3, pushed the air deep into her lungs, locking the weakness away. The ache died. Cold, hard reality replaced it. She looked at Daniel. She saw his dilated pupils. She saw the grease on his skin. He was lying. He was terrified she might actually read the paperwork sitting between them. Jennifer picked up the heavy metal pen from the desk. She tapped the tip against the solid oak surface. Once, hard, crack. The sharp, hollow sound severed Daniel's sentence in half. He flinched. The mother stopped dabbing her eyes. The room went dead quiet. "I have heard enough," Jennifer said. Her voice was completely flat. No anger, no pitch. The absolute absence of emotion made Daniel's smirk freeze in place. Jennifer set the pen down. She reached out and pulled the manila folder toward her edge of the desk. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the empty rows of the bank statements. Zero balances where thousands used to be. Red ink bleeding across the white pages. The rot was deep. But this complete financial slaughter did not start this morning. The land in Savannah was just the final nail. To understand exactly how a family could tear itself apart over dirt paper and a lifetime of cheap lies, the clock had to go backward. It started on a Tuesday night 6 months ago. In the freezing, sterile hallway of the Macon General Hospital. 6 months ago. The intensive care unit at Macon General Hospital smelled like cheap bleach and stale sickness. It was 3 in the morning. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing with a low, irritating hum. The only other sound in the long hallway was the flat, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of heart monitors bleeding through the cracked doors. My boots scraped against the cold linoleum floor. Heavy, stiff. I had been awake for 36 hours straight. A red-eye flight from the West Coast, a cheap rental car, and a quick stop at a gas station for 2 black coffees that were already turning lukewarm in my hands. Nobody came to the airport. Daniel was busy at some company dinner. My mother was too stressed to drive. Deep inside my jacket pocket, my fingers rubbed the sharp edge of a folded piece of paper. The receipt. $40,000. Drained straight from my savings account just hours ago to cover the bypass surgery my father desperately needed. The paper felt crisp against my skin. It felt like I had finally bought my way into being a good daughter. I stopped outside room 412. The heavy wooden door was cracked open a few inches. I shifted both paper cups to my left hand. I reached up with my right and smoothed the collar of my shirt. I rolled my shoulders back, forcing the bone-deep exhaustion out of my posture. I prepared to smile. To walk in there hand over the coffee and just be family. Then I heard my mother's voice. "Thank God you are here, Danny," she sniffled. I paused. I looked through the narrow gap. My mother was sitting by the hospital bed, clutching Daniel's hand like a lifeline. Daniel stood there wearing a wrinkled polo shirt that smelled like cheap cologne. He was holding a $10 fruit basket wrapped in tacky plastic. "She is always gone." My mother continued, her voice dropping into that familiar bitter pitch. "Sending a check is easy, but money does not buy affection. Looking at your father like this, I just thank God I have a son to lean on." My hand hovered an inch over the metal door handle. The metal was freezing. Daniel shifted his weight. He sighed, playing the part of the weary provider. "Just let her pay the hospital bills, Mom. She works those government jobs out on the coast. Lives out of a suitcase. She has no husband, no kids. What else is she going to spend it on? It is her job to take care of the family financially." He paused. The silence in the room stretched out thick and calculating. "Honestly?" Daniel added, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "With Grandpa Walter gone, it makes 0 sense for her name to be on that Savannah property. You and I need to manage it. Keep it in the real family." A cold, heavy rock dropped to the bottom of my stomach. I stood paralyzed on the linoleum. The crisp $40,000 receipt in my pocket suddenly felt like a sick joke. A pathetic, expensive joke. I had paid 40 grand just to hear that I was nothing more than a bank account. I waited for the anger. I waited for the heat to rise in my chest, for the urge to kick the door open, to scream, to demand every single dime back right there in the dark. But the anger never came. Instead, the illusion simply died. Right there in the freezing hallway. It shattered quietly, turning to dust on the hospital floor. They did not want a daughter. They did not want a sister. They just wanted my credit line. My jaw locked tight. The muscles in my neck pulled rigid. I closed my eyes, forcing my heart rate to drop. Slow, steady breaths. In, out. The burning sensation behind my eyes evaporated. A freezing, absolute clarity washed over me. I pulled my hand back from the door handle. I did not push it open. If you have ever realized that you were just a walking ATM for the people who share your blood, you know exactly how this coldness feels. Drop a yes in the comments if you've ever had to cut off toxic family members to save yourself. Like this video and hit subscribe so you don't miss how this payback unfolds. I turned around. I walked over to the aluminum trash can sitting against the wall. I dropped both cups of coffee inside. Thud. I turned my back on room 412 and walked out of the hospital. I didn't say a word. The bleeding stopped that night. The vault snapped shut. My rented apartment was dead quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. The cheap plastic blinds were drawn tight against the streetlights, plunging the living room into heavy shadows. The only light came from the harsh, cold blue glare of the laptop screen. It cut across the dark room, illuminating the sharp angles of my tired face. 2 in the morning. A chipped ceramic mug sat next to the keyboard. The black coffee inside was ice-cold bitter and tasted like burnt ash. I hadn't slept since I walked away from the hospital corridor. Sleep was a luxury for people who trusted the locks on their doors. I didn't trust anything anymore. The hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen kicked on, vibrating through the thin floorboards. I ignored it. My index finger rested heavily on the mouse. Click. I bypassed my personal checking accounts. I went straight to the county tax portal. I typed in the parcel number for the Savannah property. Grandpa Walter's land. He left it to me. It wasn't just dirt and pine trees. It was the only place I ever felt human. It was greasy hands, rusted wrenches, and the smell of thick motor oil. He was the only one who taught me how to fix things instead of just paying them off. The web page loaded. I scrolled down the public records, my eyes scanning the dry bureaucratic data. Then my hand stopped. My finger froze over the mouse wheel. There, sitting on line 12 of the property report, was a lien, a home equity line of credit. $200,000. I stared at the numbers. The blue light reflected in my eyes. The approval date was exactly 3 months ago. 3 months ago, I was working a government contract out on the Pacific coast. Completely off the grid, no cell service, no internet, no way to sign a legal document. I opened the scanned PDF of the loan agreement. I zoomed in on the signature line at the bottom of page 4. It was good, a solid practiced fake. But the pressure on the tail end of the R was too light. The slant was lazy. Daniel. He forged my name to gut Grandpa Walter's legacy. He didn't just steal money. He reached into the past and spat on the only memory I actually cared about. I didn't slam my fist on the desk. I didn't cry. The muscles in my jaw just locked into concrete. A freezing, absolute stillness settled deep in my chest. Metal rattled in the front door lock. The deadbolt clicked open. Daniel pushed the door wide. He had the spare key I gave our mother for emergencies. He didn't knock. He strolled in wearing a brand new high-end designer t-shirt that smelled like expensive fabric softener and entitlement. He dropped his keys on the kitchen counter. They landed with a sharp metallic clatter. He crossed the living room and threw himself onto my worn sofa. He propped his heavy, expensive sneakers right on top of my coffee table. "Hey sis," he said, rubbing his jaw. He flashed that easy, greedy smile. "I need to borrow your car tomorrow. Got some errands to run for the house." He didn't wait for an answer. He just kept talking, filling the quiet apartment with his noise. "Oh, by the way, Dad's medical bills bumped up another $1,000 this month. Just transfer the cash straight to my personal account. It is easier that way, so I can just pay it directly." I didn't snap the laptop shut. I didn't scramble to hide the screen. I just turned my chair around slowly. The blue glow washed over my back, throwing a long, dark shadow across the floor toward him. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The sweat on his brow. The slight twitch in his foot. I didn't see a younger brother who needed help. I saw a thief sitting on my furniture. A thief asking for gas money in the getaway car. The silence stretched out. Daniel shifted on the couch. His smile slipped just a fraction. He hated the quiet. "All right," I said. My voice was flat, cold. "I will transfer it tomorrow." I watched his shoulders drop. He bought it. He actually thought he was getting away with it. He thought I was just the same tired, obedient ATM I had always been. I turned back to the glowing screen. I wasn't going to confront him. I was going to give him the $1,000. I was going to let him blindly dig the hole a little deeper until the dirt caved in. The Reed family living room felt like a trap. The air was thick, heavy, and hot. It smelled of stale beer soaked into the carpet and cheap, pungent cigars. It was Sunday morning, but there was nothing holy about this house. My uncle sat slouched in the corner recliner, puffing on a brown cigar, blowing thick clouds of gray smoke toward the yellowed, water-stained ceiling. "You make easy money out there on the coast, Jenny," my uncle said. He pointed the wet, chewed end of his cigar at me. "Daniel is here. He is carrying the weight, taking care of your folks. So what if he had to borrow a little against the house? You need to pitch in. You are blood. People in town talk. You don't want them laughing at us, do you?" My mother sat on the very edge of the sagging sofa. She nodded fast, letting out a long, heavy sigh. The kind of theatrical sigh meant to make me feel small. A calculated weight of guilt designed to crush my spine. I sat in the stiff armchair across from them, both feet flat on the floor. My hands rested parallel on my thighs. I didn't curl my fingers into fists. I didn't shift my weight. I became a stone. "I understand," I said. My voice was completely hollow. Nothing for them to grab onto. Nothing for them to use. A loud screeching noise ripped through the hallway, packing tape tearing violently off a cardboard box. Daniel walked out of the hall. He was dragging Grandpa Walter's old oak chest across the scuffed hardwood floor. The heavy wood scraped loudly, leaving a deep gouge in the varnish. The smell of mildew and old grease drifted into the stifling room. Daniel kicked the chest open with the toe of his expensive sneaker. He reached inside and pulled out a heavy rusted steel wrench. The exact wrench Grandpa used to teach me how to fix a cracked engine block when I was 12. Daniel tossed it. The heavy metal hit the floor with a harsh, ugly clang. "This garbage is taking up too much space," Daniel muttered, wiping dust off his designer jeans. "I am having the junk guys haul it off this afternoon. Need to make room for a new pool table." He looked right at me. He was waiting for me to snap, waiting for me to scream about Grandpa's memory, to beg him not to throw away the only pieces of my childhood that mattered. My jaw locked. The muscles in my neck tightened until they ached. The urge to break his nose was a physical burning weight in my chest, but my eyes stayed dead flat, like frozen water. I let the silence stretch out thick and uncomfortable. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the rusted wrench. I picked it up. The cold, rough metal grounded my mind. I placed it gently back inside the oak chest. I closed the lid. I didn't say a single word. My silence was a drug for him. It inflated his ego. He thought he had broken me. Daniel walked over to the glass coffee table. He slapped a thick manila folder down on the glass. "The transfer papers for Grandpa Walter's trust fund." "Tomorrow," Daniel said. He leaned over, giving my shoulder a heavy, condescending pat. His hand felt hot and greasy through my shirt. "We go to the lawyer's office. You sign the management rights over to me. Mom and Dad already agreed. You are always out of town anyway. It is just easier if my name is on the accounts." He was stealing my property, taking on massive debt in my name, and he wanted me to thank him for the convenience. I looked down at the floor. I let him have the room. I let him feel 10 feet tall. "9 tomorrow morning," I said. "I will be there." Daniel grinned broadly. He grabbed his keys off the kitchen counter, whistling a cheap pop tune. The front door slammed shut, rattling the window panes. A minute later, the loud, aggressive roar of his brand new pickup truck shook the walls. The tires spit gravel as he peeled out of the driveway, racing off to spend money he didn't actually own. Then the house went completely silent. My mother and uncle shuffled off to the kitchen. I was alone in the living room. I reached into the deep pocket of my jacket. I pulled out my phone. The screen was dark, but the red recording light was blinking. Small, steady, unblinking. The app had been running the entire time, every word of their extortion, every casual admission of his borrowing against the property, the forced transfer of the trust. It was all there, trapped in a high-definition digital file. I tapped the screen. I hit save. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I grabbed my car keys from the table. It was time to leave this rotting house. It was time to let a real lawyer listen to this audio file and let the law burn his fake empire to the ground. The drive from Macon to Atlanta took 2 hours. 2 hours of staring at the endless stretch of gray highway, listening to the tires hum against the hot pavement. The law office sat on the 12th floor of a downtown high-rise. It was freezing inside. A sterile, artificial kind of cold that immediately dried out your throat. The waiting room smelled of dark, expensive roast coffee and lemon furniture polish. No cheap cigars here, no stale beer soaked into the carpets. Just heavy mahogany shelves, lined with thick, leather-bound legal volumes. Robert Vance sat across from me. He was 60 years old, a seasoned estate litigator with deep, heavy wrinkles carving up his face. He knew Grandpa Walter. He had handled the original deed to the Savannah property. He respected the name. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a black plastic flash drive and a folded stack of credit reports. I set them on the polished wood. The plastic clicked sharply against the glass top. "My father's retirement account is empty," I said, my voice completely flat. "And the Savannah property has a $200,000 lien against it, signed 3 months ago. I need a full financial forensic audit, every single dime." Vance picked up the drive. He plugged it into his laptop. He clicked through the files. He listened to the audio recording from the living room. He read the guilt-tripping text messages my mother sent demanding I pay for Daniel's truck. Daniel's lifestyle, Daniel's convenience. Vance took off his reading glasses. He rubbed his eyes. The disgust settled into the deep lines of his face. He looked at me, dead serious. "You understand what happens if we take this to federal court?" Vance asked. "This becomes public record. Your brother faces criminal fraud charges. Your family's reputation down in Macon gets ripped to shreds." My chest tightened. A bitter metallic taste coated the back of my throat. The shame of airing out my family's dirty laundry to a complete outsider was heavy. It was a humiliating, ugly feeling. My mother's desperate manipulation laid bare on a bright screen. But I kept my back perfectly straight. I pushed my heels into the floor. I didn't break eye contact. "They already burned the house down," I said. "I'm just calling the guys with the hoses to wash away the ashes." 5 days later, the mail carrier dropped a heavy sealed envelope on my kitchen counter. I ripped the thick paper open. The tear sounded loud and violent in the empty apartment. I pulled out a 60-page bound document, the forensic accounting report. It carried the heavy red ink stamp of an independent auditor. I turned the pages. The paper felt rough and heavy against my fingertips. The numbers were cold, hard, and undeniable. ATM cash withdrawals at a casino, monthly payments for a luxury pickup truck, forged mortgage signatures stamped by a corrupt notary. Every lie Daniel ever told was indexed, categorized, and stamped with a date. The numbers did not care about blood. They did not care about my mother's fake tears. This stack of paper was a death sentence for Daniel's little empire. My phone buzzed on the counter. A private number. "Vance." "I have the report," Vance said. His voice was clipped, strictly business. "We have enough to file the injunction. I can have a judge freeze all his accounts by 3 o'clock this afternoon." I stood by the window. Down below, the Macon afternoon traffic crawled along the hot, shimmering asphalt. I tapped my index finger against the stiff cardboard cover of the audit report. Freeze it now. End it quietly. Let him play the victim again. Let him run to the neighbors and tell the town it was all a terrible banking error, that his sister was just being paranoid. "No. No," I said into the receiver. "If you freeze it today, he plays dumb." Vance was quiet on the other end, waiting for the rest. "Tomorrow morning," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "The family is gathering at the restaurant for the trust transfer reading. I want him to stand up in front of everyone. I want him to feel 10 feet tall. Bring the freeze order there." If you have ever had to swallow your pride and expose your family's toxic secrets to an outsider just to protect yourself, you know exactly how heavy that feels. Drop a 100 in the comments if you believe the truth is more important than keeping up family appearances. Like this video and hit subscribe to hear how this trap finally snaps shut. "You want him to sign the transfer?" Vance asked, a low edge of realization creeping into his voice. "Exactly," I replied, staring at the red audit stamp. "I want him to pick up the pen and sign his own confession in front of an audience." Fighting your own blood drains you faster than any 80-hour work week. When I unlocked my apartment door that evening, my bones felt like lead. I didn't reach for a bottle of cheap bourbon to numb the disgust. I didn't throw my keys at the wall. I did what I always did to keep my mind from cracking under the weight of this family. I pulled the rusted metal ironing board out of the hall closet. The hot iron hissed violently as it hit the damp white fabric. A thick cloud of steam rose, carrying the dry, choking smell of heavy spray starch. I pushed the hot metal back and forth across the linen shirt. I pressed out every single wrinkle with hard, deliberate strokes. Push, breathe, press, exhale. The mindless repetition of a household chore was my anchor. It kept the rage locked in a tight box. Out in the real world, you deal with contracts, numbers, and facts. In this house, you deal with emotional blackmail and lies. A sharp, grinding screech of brake pads out on the street shattered the quiet. I set the iron upright. I walked over and peeked through a crack in the cheap plastic blinds. A brand new Ford pickup truck sat idling directly under the harsh yellow glow of the street lamp. The black paint was spotless. The engine rumbled with a loud, obnoxious aftermarket growl that vibrated against my window glass. Daniel stepped out of the driver's seat. He reached into the truck bed and hoisted a heavy case of expensive imported beer onto his shoulder. He yelled across the street to a neighbor sitting on a porch. "Big day tomorrow, Mike," Daniel shouted. His voice was thick with unearned pride. "Closing a massive deal on the family estate. Got my sister to finally see reason. I am taking the wheel from here on out." He was throwing a party. He was already burning through the trust fund money he didn't even legally possess yet. The sheer blinding arrogance of it made my jaw lock. I yanked the blinds shut. I cut off the noise and the sight of his pathetic ego trip. I walked over to the desk and unlatched my black leather briefcase. I checked the compartments with cold mechanical precision. Main pocket, the 60-page financial audit report sitting heavy and secure. Side pocket A, heavy steel pen. Inside, zipper. My phone sitting at exactly 100% battery. My hands moved steadily. No wasted motion, no trembling fingers. This wasn't packing for a family brunch. This was preparing for a legal slaughter. I closed the lid. I pressed the heavy brass clasps down. Snap, snap. The sound was sharp, metallic, and final in the empty room. 9 o'clock the next morning. The waiting room of the most expensive steakhouse in Macon smelled like roasting meat, rich butter, and cheap perfume. It was packed with our relatives. Aunts, uncles, and cousins holding crystal glasses of ice water, murmuring in hushed, excited tones. Daniel had rented out the private back room, putting the massive deposit on his maxed-out credit card. He strutted through the crowd wearing a charcoal suit. The collar was still slightly wrinkled. His tie hung just a little too loose. He walked straight up to me, puffing out his chest, and slapped a heavy, sweaty hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it hard, making sure the aunts and uncles were watching the loving brother take care of his sibling. "Just relax today, Jenny," Daniel said. He flashed that greasy, arrogant smile. "Once you sign the trust papers over, I will take care of everything for the house. You just go back to your job on the coast and do not worry about a thing." I didn't brush his hand away. I didn't flinch. I stared straight into his dilated, greedy eyes. He was completely blind to the trap he was standing in. He actually believed he had won. Right at that second, the heavy oak doors of the private dining room swung open. The dull, chaotic chatter of the relatives instantly died. Heavy leather heels cracked against the polished marble floor. Robert Vance stepped into the room. He held a sealed manila folder. His face was carved out of granite, his eyes sweeping the room with absolute authority. The clock just ran out. 9 in the morning. The Norfolk courthouse was a massive tomb of gray marble and cold drafts. Heavy rain lashed against the tall, arched windows, creating a dull, endless drumming sound that echoed down the long, empty corridors. Inside, the hallway smelled of industrial floor wax, damp wool coats, and decades of old, decaying paper. I walked through the metal detectors. My dark blazer was pressed stiff. The creases were sharp enough to draw blood. My boots clicked against the stone floor in a steady, unhurried rhythm. At the far end of the corridor, my family sat huddled together on a worn wooden bench. My mother strangled the thin straps of her leather purse. Her shoulders were hunched, playing the part of the exhausted, heartbroken matriarch perfectly. My father kept his eyes glued to the scuffed toes of his work boots. He did not look up. He didn't have the spine to look his own daughter in the eye. Daniel stood next to them in his wrinkled charcoal suit. He leaned close to Richard Holloway, the high-priced litigator he had hired using credit he couldn't afford. Holloway adjusted his expensive silk tie, looking at his gold watch, with a bored, impatient expression. A cloud of sharp, overly sweet cologne drifted off him. None of them stepped forward. None of them said a single word to me. I didn't stop walking. I passed them like they were strangers waiting for a bus. My heart rate stayed perfectly flat, 60 beats a minute, no spikes, no panic. I pushed open the heavy double doors of courtroom number 3, walked straight to the defense table, and sat down. I folded my hands together on the polished oak wood. I waited. Judge Harold Whitmore took the bench. He was a hard, humorless man. A judge who had spent 30 years ruling on brutal offshore labor disputes and heavy industry insurance claims. His face was lined with deep grooves, and his eyes missed nothing. He did not tolerate noise, and he absolutely despised grandstanding. The hearing officially began. Richard Holloway stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, cleared his throat with a wet, arrogant sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room, and began to tear my life apart. He didn't yell. He used cold, clinical words. Holloway held up a thick stack of medical files. My occupational therapy records. Records from the mandatory company shrink I was forced to see after back-to-back offshore rotations on the deepwater oil rigs. He read out the symptoms like a laundry list of crimes: the sleepless nights, the isolation, the physical and mental toll of working 80 hours a week in a steel cage surrounded by freezing salt water. Holloway twisted it all. He took my endurance and weaponized it into a weakness. Your Honor. Holloway said, his voice dripping with a sickening fake sympathy. My client is simply concerned for his sister's well-being. These therapy sessions, the documented insomnia, the emotional withdrawal, they point to a severe and dangerous mental instability. We are talking about the management of Walter Reed's sizable estate. The family just wants to ensure the trust is handled by someone who is grounded, someone stable. In the gallery behind me, the wooden bench creaked. My mother dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue. She sniffled loudly, making sure the sound carried all the way up to the judge's bench. Daniel bowed his head, playing the tragic brother forced to take the heavy burden from his sick, broken sister. I didn't turn around. I didn't grip the edge of the table. My chest did not rise and fall with anger. I just looked straight ahead at the judge's wooden gavel. The disgust I felt was cold, heavy, and completely absolute. They were cowards. They were using the exact scars I earned paying their bills to prove I was unfit to hold my own grandfather's land. It was a clinical, calculated betrayal. Holloway kept talking. He loved the sound of his own voice. He was high on the performance, completely misreading the temperature of the room. He took a confident step toward the judge's bench, holding up a single sheet of paper like a trophy. In fact, Your Honor. Holloway said, a smug smile creeping onto his face. Workers who receive high-level hazard duty commendations often develop a distorted perception of their own records. The emotional exaggeration is not uncommon. This emotional inflation makes them highly unpredictable in financial matters. They lose touch with reality. The entire courtroom went dead quiet. The faint hum of the air conditioner seemed to vanish. The air sucked right out of the room. Holloway had just stepped over a line he didn't even know existed. Judge Whitmore stopped writing. He slowly set his pen down on the oak desk. He reached up with both hands and took off his reading glasses. The judge leaned forward, the shadow of the bench falling over his face. His eyes turned dark and lethal. He stared directly down at Holloway. The silence stretched out, suffocating and thick, waiting for the axe to fall. The Norfolk courtroom was a vacuum. The suffocating manufactured heat of the building pressed down on my shoulders. The only sound left in the massive space was the cold, heavy rain lashing against the tall glass windows. Tap, tap. Judge Harold Whitmore's thick index finger struck the cover of the manila folder. The sound echoed off the wood paneling like a hammer hitting an empty coffin. Counselor, Whitmore said. His voice was low. It scraped the air like rusted iron. Read page 4. Richard Holloway froze. The smug, practiced half-smile melted off his face. He looked down at the stack of occupational therapy records he had just waved around like a trophy. He slowly flipped to the 4th page. I watched his eyes scan the black ink. It took exactly 3 seconds. The color completely drained from his skin, leaving him a sickening, chalky gray. Read it out loud, Whitmore ordered. The weight in those 4 words was absolute. Holloway swallowed hard. His expensive silk tie suddenly looked like a noose. His hands began to shake. The thick paper rattled loudly in the dead quiet of the room. It is a federal incident report, Holloway choked out. His arrogant voice fractured, breaking into a pathetic stammer. Offshore rig 42, the blowout. Lead safety engineer Jennifer Reed entered the high-pressure fire zone 3 consecutive times, manually extracting 12 crew members from the burning lower deck. The silence in the gallery was deafening. My father's head snapped up his face, turning the color of wet ash. Holloway was forced to keep reading. He had to read the exact medical evaluation he tried to use to destroy me. Patient demonstrated exceptional emotional regulation under catastrophic pressure. Holloway read the paper, shaking violently now. Her flat effect reflects extraordinary leadership stability and focus in lethal environments, not cognitive decline. My mother gripped the wooden bench. Her knuckles turned white. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "Do not stop," Judge Whitmore commanded. "Read the addendum, the sworn statement attached to the trust by Walter Reed." Holloway looked like he was going to be sick. He cleared his throat. "If my granddaughter brings the harshness of the ironwork home with her," Holloway read his voice barely a whisper, "it is because she put the lives of others first. She is the only one in this bloodline with a spine." My mother buried her face in both hands. Her shoulders shook. There was no theatrical sigh this time. No fake tears for the audience. The shame hitting her was entirely real. Daniel slumped forward in his chair. His back rounded. His entire body went rigid, paralyzed by the sheer crushing weight of public humiliation. He had spent the trust fund money. He had bought a truck, bought the beer, and bragged to the neighbors. He tried to use our grandfather's legacy to spit on the only person Walter Reed actually respected. And now the entire room knew exactly what Daniel was. Nothing. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "Do you actually want to stand in my courtroom?" Whitmore asked, "and argue that a federal commendation for bravery is evidence of mental incompetence?" Holloway lowered his head. He stared at his expensive leather shoes. "No, Your Honor," Holloway muttered. "Petition completely denied." Whitmore declared, slamming the file shut. "Full and exclusive control of the Walter Reed Trust remains with the defendant. No shared management. No oversight. We are adjourned." I didn't smile. I didn't let out a breath of relief. I didn't look at my family. I reached out and closed my black leather briefcase. Snap. I stood up. I turned my back on the absolute wreckage they had created for themselves, and I walked down the center aisle. I left them drowning in it. I pushed through the heavy oak doors into the cold hallway, the brass handle freezing against my palm. The echo of my boots was interrupted by the frantic sliding sound of leather shoes rushing up behind me. "Jenny, wait!" Daniel's voice cracked thick with panic and desperation. I didn't slow down. If you have ever sat in silence while toxic relatives tried to ruin your reputation, only to watch the truth finally catch up to them, you know exactly how satisfying this moment is. Drop a "they got what they deserved" in the comments if you have watched karma handle the people who betrayed you. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to hear what happens when I finally confront him in the hallway. The hallway outside courtroom 3 was completely dead. The reporters and the gossiping relatives were gone, chased out by the judge's gavel. All that was left was the heavy rhythmic thud of gray rain hitting the massive glass windows. The air out here was cold. It smelled of wet wool and the burnt stale coffee from the vending machine in the corner. I stood by a wooden bench. I pulled the heavy brass zipper of my briefcase shut. Daniel stepped into my line of sight. He blocked the path to the elevators. He didn't look like the guy who bought a round of imported beers for the neighborhood last night. The arrogance was completely gone, washed right out of him. His expensive charcoal suit was bunched up at the collar. His shoulders sagged heavily under the fabric. He stared down at his scuffed leather shoes. His breathing was shallow, ragged, like he was choking on the air. "I am sorry," Daniel said. The words sounded hollow, strange, like they didn't belong in his mouth. I stopped. I didn't step toward him. I kept my breathing flat, steady. I looked at his face, scanning the twitch in his jaw, the sweat cooling on his forehead. I didn't feel a single drop of pity. "For which part?" I asked. Daniel swallowed hard. His eyes stayed glued to the floor. The golden boy was finally cracking the shiny exterior, peeling back to show the terrified kid underneath. "For all of it," Daniel muttered, his voice cracking. "I spent my whole life feeling small next to you. You went out there on the rigs, you had the guts. Grandpa Walter respected you. You were the one they actually looked up to." I narrowed my eyes. He wasn't some calculating mastermind. He was just a coward. A weak, spoiled kid, terrified of his own shadow, desperately stealing money to buy a spine he never had. His greed wasn't born from malice. It was born from pure, pathetic fear. Footsteps shuffled on the hard marble floor. My mother walked up behind him. She was shaking. The proud, judgmental shell she wore to church every Sunday was completely stripped away. "I was wrong," she whispered. Her voice broke on a heavy sob. My father stood right next to her. He didn't say a word for a long time. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked old. He reached up and rubbed his thumb hard against the thick yellow calluses on his palm. I always thought being strong meant you just never broke down. My father rasped, his voice thick with gravel. Turns out, it just means carrying the weight that the rest of us cannot handle. That hit my chest. A dull, heavy thud. It was the most honest thing the man had ever said to me. I looked at the three of them, a broken, rotting family standing in a cold courthouse hallway. I nodded once. I acknowledged the apology, but I did not say, "It is okay." It wasn't okay. 20 years of eating Thanksgiving dinner alone in a cheap motel room while they celebrated back home couldn't be erased by 10 minutes of crying. The bleeding had stopped, but the scars were permanent. Daniel looked up. His eyes were wide, desperate for a lifeline. "So, what happens now?" Daniel asked. His hands shook at his sides. "Are you just cutting us off?" I looked past him out the large window at the flooded Norfolk streets. I wasn't his sister right now. I was the lead engineer making a cold call on a damaged rig. "You can help out," I said. Daniel blinked, stunned. "You will do administrative work for the trust," I told him, my voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "Filing, taxes, you will be supervised. Every single dime will be tracked. You want to be part of this family, you are going to earn it back. From the bottom." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without making a sound. I grabbed the handle of my briefcase. "Because," I said, my voice dropping to a low, absolute whisper, "someone in this family finally has to stop keeping score." I walked past him. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped straight into the freezing rain. Spring 2026. The Walter Reed Offshore Workers Outreach Center officially opened on a damp Tuesday morning in late April. No flashy ribbon-cutting ceremonies. No local politicians in cheap suits making empty promises for the cameras. It was just a solid, heavy block of red brick sitting aggressively near the Norfolk riverbank. Built for people who knew exactly how things broke and how much it cost to fix them. The concrete floors were unpolished, designed to take a beating from heavy steel-toed boots. The morning air smelled like wet mortar, heavy ocean salt, and burnt black coffee dripping from a cheap plastic percolator in the corner. Rows of folding metal chairs lined the concrete courtyard. Every single seat was taken. Old deep-sea welders sat with bad knees and ruined hearing, their hands shaking slightly on their laps. Young roughnecks fresh off the deep-water rigs leaned against the walls, still trying to shake the high-pressure tremors out of their bones. In the back, quiet, mothers sat holding framed photographs of sons the ocean simply never gave back. Earl Jackson sat right in the front row, a retired rig foreman. He rested his thick, scarred hands heavily on the head of a wooden cane. He smiled broadly, staring at the raw brick walls like he had mixed the cement and laid every single block himself. I stood at the microphone. My dark suit was pressed flat. The creases in the fabric were sharp enough to cut paper. I placed both hands tightly on the edges of the wooden podium. I looked down at the crowd. I didn't bring any index cards. I didn't need them. I saw my own heavy history staring back at me from those metal chairs. "The strongest people I have ever known," I said. My voice carried clearly over the low, constant hum of the coastal wind. "They are not the ones who manage to hide from the damage. They are the ones who strap that pain securely to their backs. The ones who carry it into the dark. And after all of it, they still choose to be kind." The courtyard went completely quiet. There was no immediate applause, just the heavy, grounded silence of people who understood exactly what it meant to survive the crushing depths. I stepped away from the podium. I reached deep into the inside pocket of my jacket. My fingers traced the familiar rough edges of cold, rusted metal. I pulled out Grandpa Walter's heavy steel rig tag, his old Union identification token. The metal was scratched, deeply dented, and stained from decades of grease and salt water. I walked over to the thick glass display case built into the lobby wall. I carefully set the heavy piece of steel onto the dark velvet shelf. Clink. The sharp sound of metal against glass echoed briefly in the hall. It was a final sound. It closed a massive, invisible loop. The terrified 17-year-old girl who boarded a cheap bus in the middle of the night to escape a rotting toxic house, was permanently gone. Standing there breathing in the heavy salt air, a cold, hard truth settled deep into my chest. My worth was never up for a family vote. I never needed their permission to build my life, and I certainly didn't need their applause to validate my survival. Their complete lack of love was a failure of their own character, not a debt I was supposed to pay. By sunset, the folding chairs were stacked away. The courtyard was empty. The evening air dropped 10 degrees, turning sharp and biting. Earl and I stood shoulder to shoulder by the heavy iron railing, looking out over the Chesapeake Bay. The choppy water turned the color of bruised brass under the dying sun. Earl tapped the rubber tip of his cane against the asphalt. "So," Earl rasped, his voice rough from years of breathing diesel fumes, "have you finally found peace?" "Jenny." I looked out at the horizon. Massive gray industrial freighters sat anchored in the deep water. They were silent, heavy, and covered in deep, ugly scrapes from fighting the open ocean. They weren't pretty, but they were impossible to sink. I let the freezing cold wind hit my face. My lips pulled back into a thin, tight smile. If you have ever had to walk away from the people who share your blood just to save your own sanity, you know how hard this journey is. Drop a home in the comments if you believe that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you were born into. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to help others find their own strength. "No," I said, my voice completely flat, completely sure. "But I finally feel like I am home." The coastal wind blew hard against my back, stripping away the very last invisible threads of a broken past.